get a little bit of a family history from as far back as you heard about, like where great-grandparents came from and the grandparents and all that stuff. And on your mother and your dad's side.
Yeah.
Who was the first?
What my mother told me, her grandmother was born in. She cutting you out in there?
That's okay.
Is everything I'm saying going on there now?
Yeah, it's being tape recorded.
Can you cut it out if you don't need it?
Yeah, I can end it. Go ahead with whatever background you got from your mom and dad.
Well, from my mother's background, her folks came from Scotland. Her grandmother was, her mother was born in a place called Kilmarnock. It's on the, it's a fishing area in the coast of Scotland, next to the Irish side. And her name was, her maiden name was Campbell. Her grandmother's maiden name was Campbell. And they were relatives of the Campbell clan, who was headed by the Duke of Argyll. Distant relatives, maybe third or fourth cousins, but she was enough of a Campbell that she was included in the Campbell gatherings at the Duke of Argyll's estate. I don't suppose he personally contacted her when she was a small 8 or 9 year old girl, and she came to America when she was 8 years old, I think my mother said. And her father, my mother's father, came from Ireland, and he was born on the way over or shortly after they arrived in Canada. And he was apprenticed to a blacksmith at an early age and learned the blacksmith trade thoroughly. And where and when they married my grandmother, I don't know, but they lived in Ontario, Canada. And I've had some contact with a distant relative of ours named Lila Bradley that is what do you call these people that run down things?
Genealogist.
She was a genealogist. And maybe an amateur, but I mean pretty skilled at it. And I still got information I can get from her as to where and when Robert White and I've forgotten my grandmother's maiden name. Anyway, when they got married and the children they had, it was in Canada, Ontario, Canada, the province of Ontario. My mother was born in an area called Georgian Bay, which was right on one of the shores of the Great Lakes. See, if I'd had a little background, I could have told you the Great Lakes, one of the eastern Great Lakes. Anyway, Georgian Bay would identify it because the bay is attached onto the lake. And the grandfather was a traveling blacksmith in the sense that if work got slack in a place where he was working, he was skilled enough to move and set up somewhere else. He was a master blacksmith. He could make, as well as shoe horses, he could make things, forge things, you know, make iron and stuff like that for kitchen with a small kitchenware, funnels, you know, sheet metal. He could work in sheet metal, welding and brazing and all that kind of stuff. Highly skilled blacksmith. He made a good living for them, and they weren't poor. I remember my mother telling me that they wore shoes all summer, which, well, in Canada in those days among the non-wealthy was unusual. Kids went barefoot in the summer, a lot of them. In other words, it was a mark of somewhat of your family status that the kids wore shoes all summer. I guess they twitted the kids that didn't. And they had a large family. I don't have them all at the tip of my tongue, but my mother was the second oldest. She had one older brother. She had one brother killed in the Boer War. I forget his name, but I can. that, I guess, is some of the records we got. And her younger brother, Clayton, was killed in the World War One. He said my grandmother never got over Clayton's death and mourned for the rest of her life. My grandfather had occasion to move down into North Dakota, I guess, for a short time. And that's when my mother met my father there in a little town called Forest River. My mother at that time had enough education to go through 2 years of normal school, which qualified her for a school teacher. She got a school teacher job in North Dakota and met my father that way. I guess in those days they had quite a social life, and barn dances and grange gatherings. You know, the typical life of Midwestern people in those days, of 100 years ago. And my dad used to play a violin, Okie style or country style, fairly well. He had a good ear. He used to call the dances, and I guess my mother met him at a barn dance. That's as close as I can come to how they met. Anyway, she was, I think, 28 years old when she got married. He was about 32. And they lived in Forest River, North Dakota, a little town 30 miles north of Grand Forks. And in the course of events, they had 7 children, one set of twins, all close together. My oldest brothers were a year apart. My oldest brother and the set of twins were a year apart. Dean and Don were the twins. My oldest brother was John. And the 4th brother was Kenny. He was about 2 years younger than the twin. And I came along in 1912, about 2.5 years younger than Kenny. My brother Edgar was born in 1913, my brother Bed in 1915. My mother had very severe asthma, and the North Dakota winters, as you don't need to be told, are very severe. Sometimes you could have 6 months of winter in North Dakota. And around about, let's see, Bud was 3 years old, so that would be 15, 18, 1918. The doctor told my father that my mother wouldn't live another winter in North Dakota. They had to get to a warmer climate. So in 1918, we moved to Colorado, at a place called Fort Collins, Colorado. It's near Denver, north of Denver. And my mother Colorado has a severe winter climate too. My mother didn't do much better. She used to have asthmatic attacks so bad that she couldn't get up in the morning without lighting a powder that, I'm forgetting the name of it, but it's a mustard-like powder that looked like, just like you poured dry mustard into a pan lid and lit it. And she smoked the fumes, and that would clear her lungs so that she could get up and do her housework, you know, without passing out. Otherwise, she couldn't get enough air to function. And she had that trouble in Colorado, and so after we lived in Colorado from actually we got to Colorado late 1917, and we lived went to Utah, we moved to Utah in 1920, in a place about 15 miles from Ogden, Utah, a small town called Hooper, Hooper, right on the lake shore. It was only about 1.5 miles from the lake. And my mother, for some reason, they have severe winters in Utah, but apparently the climate agreed with her. And she recovered quite a bit of her health. She got in much better shape. even with her poor health, she still did all the housework and washing. Of course, she had help from my dad. He was real handy with machine tools and stuff, and he worked in the sugar factory and worked on off season. He worked for the Mormon farmers. He was actually, us kids were old enough. We kids were old enough to work at that time. I was 10 years old. My older brothers were 12, 14, 15 years old, and my dad would sort of contract us out as a crew to hoe beets with the sugar farms in the area. Growing sugar beets was one of the major occupations. In fact, the occupation was so big that they built a factory there, and my dad worked in the sugar factory in the off season, or when it was running, not in the off season, when it was running. We lived 2 years in Utah, and my mother's health finally got worse again. So my dad figured to get to California, maybe she'd improve. So we moved to California in 1922 to a little place in the San Joaquin Valley named Visalia. It's 40 miles south of Fresno, about 75 miles north of Bakersfield.
How'd you hit on Visalia? You know where you was going?
Well, the reason we hit on Visalia is, you know, the sugar factory crews and engineers and stuff sort of know each other, and my dad had contact with a guy that had worked at a sugar factory in Visalia, or they were thinking of setting one up. Anyway, the connection is that there was a verbal connection between Visalia and the place in Hooper, Utah. In other words, he had talked with people that says, try Visalia. He thought they were going to build a factory there. Well, it turns out they either had a factory that they closed up or they never got around to building. You know, a 10-year-old kid isn't too interested in that. But my dad was a pretty fair carpenter, and while he didn't work steady and we weren't rich, he made enough he never had enough money to buy a house, but he made enough money the house rent was cheap in those $10, $15 a month. And John was 15, 16 years old. He could work like a man. We got by. We didn't always have what we wanted, but we always had something to eat and something to wear and a warm place to sleep at night. But that was, the Depression was coming on then in 1922. And times were tough. My mother worked outside the house, doing housework when she could get it. And half the time my dad was somewhere else with a car. He'd have to sometimes move out of town to get work. And my mother would walk. Everywhere she went, she'd walk. She walked 6, 4, 5 miles a day, maybe coming to and from a job. She wasn't a young woman at that time. She must have been up in her 50s. However, in those days, particularly around Visalia, there was a lot of fruit. They raised practically everything: oranges, grapes, apples, cherries, plums, prunes. And if you wanted to rustle or knew where to go, or knew a farmer that would hire kids, which they did in those days, they'd hire kids 8 and 10 years old to pick prunes. As far as I know, we never had to fill out any labor permits. Maybe my dad took care of that. But things were free and easy. And we managed to scrape enough money together in the summer to last through the winter. It wasn't easy, but we got along. Am I making any sense to you?
Oh yeah, we're following real nice.
My mother had been a school teacher for a couple of years, so we were fortunate that we got guided by her into good literature and good books. You know what they have. A mother can have quite a bit of influence. My dad wasn't illiterate, but he had only gone to the 8th grade in North Dakota. Back in the 1880s in North Dakota, you know, the schooling was interrupted by the winter and by the crop season. Kids would have to come out of school to work on the farms and ranches. And I don't think there was any law that he had to go beyond the 8th grade. But he was a shrewd, intelligent man. wasn't learned in mathematics, but he could figure jobs and stuff. You know, he learned the carpenter trade fairly well. And one year got on a steady job with a California Edison company, which was a big power company. I think that's still in existence in the valley.
Yeah.
And times were good. It's strange, but occasionally he'd get on a job as a union carpenter. They made $8 a day back in 1922, which was a fantastic sum. It was like making a carpenter making $150 a day now, easily. But he didn't always get they wasn't always that lucky. He usually have to work for maybe 15 or 20 cents an hour. And we kids all worked. From 10 years old on, we all worked. When I was 10 years old, I had a job delivering milk, which I stood on the running board of a flatbed truck with the cases stacked in there, reach in, grab a bottle of milk in each hand, jump off the truck when it was running, and run and deliver it on the porch. These were the old glass milk bottles. They wouldn't allow a kid to do it nowadays. But nothing was thought of, and then my folks never even cautioned me about anything, you know. They just was assumed a kid 10 years old was big enough to do that. I got a pint of milk and a quarter for about 2 hours hard work after school. And my brothers all had very similar situations, paper jobs and scrounge around, whatever they can do. We all got a high school education, except one brother didn't graduate because that was Dean. He's kind of stubborn. He got in a row with a teacher just before graduation, and he had to go in and publicly apologize. And he says to hell with it. He was about 18 years old, getting, you know how kids get, they get kind of ornery. And that broke my mother's heart. If you're noticing those annuals out there, it's only Don that's showing it when you haven't graduated. Well, that's just a trifle that occurs in families. I mean, well, we lived in Visalia under those circumstances for 1922 to 1933, 11 years. And my older brother, John, had moved to Salinas at that time. He had gone to work in the Bay Area for the Union Oil Company. He worked his way up to a truck driver, and then they put him in 1933. They moved him to King City. He was assistant manager of the Union Oil down there in King City. He was making at that time about $120 a month, which was a fantastic salary. He helped us out quite a bit. And he helped us move over here because my brother knew some of the upper personnel at the Speckled Sugar Factory. You know about the Speckled Sugar Factory, it's closed now. And he got my older brothers, he brought Dean and Don and Kenny, all got jobs at the sugar factory. At that time I was restricted by a doctor because in 1932 I got a severe case of flu, which I guess turned into pneumonia. I never went to the doctor, but it flattened me out, so I got to where I couldn't run or gain weight. My mother took me to a clinic where she occasionally worked, and the doctor sent me home and says, "This guy is off all athletics. He does nothing but go to school. He's got a damaged and large heart." So I wasn't helpless. I worked around home and did light work, but I didn't get the job in the sugar factory. I was about 21 at that time. So we lived moved to Salinas. I did fairly well. My brothers worked in the sugar factory. And
I saw like your picture and John's in Visalia Junior College yearbook. You both went there.
Visalia Junior College. Yeah, in Visalia. Yeah, I went clear through the first 2 years of junior college.
You, John, do any of your other brothers go?
Kenny attended junior college, but he didn't graduate. We all went through Visalia High School except Dean. And Kenny was a big football star in high school and junior college, and John was a big football and track star in high school. In fact, he was good enough to run in the state meet and place fourth. The top sprinter of the high school in California at that time was a fellow named Frank Wyckoff. And my brother came about that close to tying him in the 100-yard dash. And 4 of them finished in a blanket finish. And Ed was a good high school football player, basketball player, track man. So was Bud. But Bud also had rheumatic fever when he was about 12 years old. And that killed a career from him. The doctors, when they examined him at school, they wouldn't let him run or play football. It used to break his heart because he used to go out there and run with the guys who were sprinting on the team. He'd beat them, but they wouldn't let him compete. Anyway, we got to Salinas and things improved. My older brothers finally, Don and Dean finally bought a house on Romy Lane. Well, I think you remember going down there.
Yeah, I've been there lots of times.
And you pretty well know what happened then on the... I went in the Army in 1942. My health had improved so much that I passed the draft board, although my own local doctor later on, Dr. Husser, years later said, how in the hell did you get in the Army? I said, well, heart was beating pretty good at that. The day I made the test, I told him about it. I said, what are you trying to do? I'm trying to avoid Army duty. So I just shut up. It was rough. I went in the first 2 years I was an MP, and then the second 2 years I was in what they call the place, a outfit called the Combat Engineers, where nothing was easy. I mean, we rode in trucks and hauled bridge building equipment around, heavy steel timber and heavy boards, heavy board treads put across the bridge, across the steel timber. But I survived. It didn't seem to do me any harm. I spent 39 months in the 2 services and spent 9 months in Europe and during the end of the war. Spent some time in London when they were buzz bombing it. Spent some time in France and spent a couple of months in Germany right at the end, near the end of the war. Most of it I didn't see any combat, but we got real close and did a lot of mopping up of mines and stuff. It's funny when you're young and don't have any family, it never dwells on it. You could get killed. Picking up mines was dangerous, but I mean, you got used to it. I mean, a few guys got bounced in my company, but I was lucky. Never anything happened to me. When we came back from the war, I was, let's see, I've been in there, when I was 30, I was almost 34 years old. And I got a job first job I got was at the Hotel Jeffrey. I wasn't going to hang around in the Salinas. I was making plans to go to Alaska. I had some friends that were up there that said you could get a job anywhere. That's when I met Mom. She was a secretary at the hotel. And I was just working as a porter in the hotel. I thought it was temporary. I told her I'd only be there maybe a month or two. And old man Jeffrey, and she didn't want to hire me. She told Jeffrey, this guy will never stay. So she sent me out of the office down the street, and Jeffrey come out and says, where did that guy go, that soldier? And she says, oh, he wasn't going to stay. He told me he'd only going to work a month or two. Jeffrey went and chased me down the street and caught me and says, come back, I want to talk to you. And he hired me. Well, I worked there about 6 or 8 months and got a job at the Tynan Lumber Company, which was, again, hard working, but it paid well. And your mother and I got to going together. And things just naturally progressed. You know, she was real cute, full of pep. And I told her, I said, I haven't got much money saved up, and I'm not much of a husband prospects. She says, that don't matter, we'll get along. So we got married in let's see, what the hell date was it? 47, I guess. I got out of the Army in 46, we were married a year later. And is this the kind of stuff you want?
Yeah. It's,
And at that time, we all worked in Salinas. All 7 brothers were in Salinas at the same time working, except Edgar. Edgar had gone to graduated from junior college and had gone to study engineering at Berkeley. He never lived at home past 19. I got out of junior college in 1932, so Ed got out in about 34. From 34 on, he never lived at home. He'd come home, but he never lived at home. He lived up at Berkeley. He was a rustler and worked for his room and board. He got his room and board by managing a rooming house, made sure the lights were on at night and the steps were clear and the fire extinguishers were hung up, kind of an on-deck manager. He lived there and managed the place to that extent. And he finally, took him 3 years, but he finally got a degree in mining engineering. He always did well for himself. Dean and Don, Dean continued to work at Spreckles until he retired from ill health, and Don got a job at the post office. I don't know the exact years he worked, but he worked many years. And unfortunately, both of them smoked all the time, chain smoked. And when Dean was on in his early 50s, he contracted lung cancer. And, he had to go to the hospital. He didn't live very long. He had it so violent. He passed away before my mother did sometime in I could get all those dates for you, but I don't have mine on the tip.
It was around 62 or 3. I was junior high school, I think.
You remember Uncle Dean.
Oh, yeah.
And then my oldest brother John, he got killed in a wreck back in the late 60s. Mm-hmm. And John, got severe diabetes, so bad that they finally died of that. He died of lung cancer, but the diabetes hastened his death. And Kenny moved to Fresno. He married Hazel Setzer from Fresno, and he moved over there and went to Fresno State and got a job as a school teacher, working in those little valley towns, Porterville and Farmersville and Visalia. Did pretty well.
Didn't he end up at Tres Pinos for a while?
Yeah, the school superintendent of Tres Pinos for a year or two. He moved all around that section of the valley. I'd have to ask Hazel and Patsy, the exact dates he went there. I could find all that for you. And he chain smoked well. When I say chain smoked, he smoked constantly from 16 years old on. All of them did. It was just a thing to do. Edgar never smoked, and I never smoked, but Bud smoked. Bud died of diabetes and lung complications. And, well, you've pretty well been brought up to date where you know about as much about things as I did know.
Do you know anything about your dad's side of the family, your grandparents and great-grandparents?
My dad's grandparents, my dad's great-grandparents were born in Ireland. What part of Ireland, I don't know. It must have been the upper part because they weren't Catholics. I could find that out too from this. I named that one. Leola Bradley. Did I say it?
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah, she's got that information, and I can get it. She, She might not be alive now, but I mean, she certainly passed it on to some Have you known anybody that went into running down the family history?
Not too much.
Yeah. Well, you know what they do.
Yeah,
Well, like this cousin that just sent Frida that letter where she was filling in the stuff for you.
Yeah.
Lila Bradley did all that. She's got all that on my father. She knows who my uncle were better than I do. My dad had a large family. I think there were about 8 or 9 in the family. He had 2 sisters and I think 6 brothers, 6 or 7 brothers.
When did they come to this country?
And they were born in Canada, in an area not too far from where my mother was born, in western Ontario, near the lake.
His dad came over from Ireland?
No,
or
his dad was born in Canada, but my dad's grandparents came from Ireland. And then
He was born in Ontario?
his maiden name was Timmins, which is an Irish name. And I have a picture of a Jim Timmins, which is a relative of mine, with my dad's uncle, I guess. I can find all that information, and I should be contacting this Bradley when I got her address.
Well,
When I got sick there a couple of years ago, it took me quite a while to get. I was able to write and phone, but I just didn't feel much up to it. You ever had a bad case of flu, and you lay around, you don't feel like doing anything? Well, I felt like that for a year. Mom felt the same way when she had her attack here at the piano years ago. It just takes you time to recover.
Well, that's pretty good. So after you got out of junior college in Visalia, you worked a little while in Visalia, and then the whole family moved to Salinas?
That's right.
And you lived around Salinas or at home? Or?
Yeah, I lived in the household. I helped my mother a lot, did a lot of yard work, garden work, shopping. I didn't work steady. I had a job downtown sweeping up. I couldn't do hard work yet. I had a job downtown sweeping parking lots and stuff like that. I kept busy.
After you worked, did you work at, you worked at Messick's Hardware once. Did you work there after Tyne and Lumber Company? Or?
No, I worked at Messick Hardware before. After I left the Tyne and Lumber Company, I worked at Messick Hardware. Right, a couple of years. I worked about 3 years there.
And you got your job at the city?
I got the job at the city about 19. After you were born, so it had to be after 1952, I think. I worked for the city of Salinas and worked 22 years for them. Retired in 1970. You went from the Parks Department to the carpenter about 1960 or something? 1958, about 1958. It was interesting work, but didn't pay too much. Well, it paid enough we could get along. And your mother and I built this house in started at about 1952. It took 4 years to finish it. But we lived right next door, which made it annoying. I made some mistakes, and probably in retrospect, I should have gotten more help and paid more labor, I put all the studs and the roof and everything up myself. It was quite a job to do it alone. I wouldn't do it again. We weren't exactly broke. We could have got another loan and hired some more. But
Did you learn your carpentry on the job from your dad then?
yeah, I knew quite a bit. And then working at Tyne, I picked up some carpentry tricks. I knew all about lumber and stuff.
Well, that's a pretty good family history. I'll have to get Frida
That's
in
all
here.
on that tape?
Yeah, I'll have to get Frida in here and run that down. Go ahead and stop it here.
It sounds kind of rambling.
Well, we'll play it back on the TV tomorrow and see what we got.